Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you once again by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and today's a big day, both because it brings the return of my comic site, Sketched, which you should check out to see what's new with it. There'll be a ton of new content this week, and because Off Panel has an amazing first-time guest. This week's guest is the writer of comics like Spidey, Silk, and the incredible current miniseries Meet the Skrulls, as well as a one-time writer and co-executive producer of the television show Supernatural. It's Robbie Thompson. Thanks for coming on, Robbie.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm going to start you with a really random place. I was telling you before that I read a lot of interviews with you, and I learned a lot about shipping when I was reading interviews with you.
You mean FedEx and UPS? And,
exactly. We need to talk about flat rate shipping because I'm not familiar with it.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big believer. I love the the book rate as well. I love them all.
It's great. Actually, I'm not even kidding. It's revolutionized shipping. Good job, Postal Service. But no, I mean, I read this interview with you where it was mostly a Supernatural interview where you talked a whole lot about shipping, and it was really interesting because I was not familiar with a lot of terms. There was all these OTPs and BroTPs, and it made me feel like simultaneously old or really out of touch, or maybe both. So like I said, you wrote for Supernatural. Shipping was a big part, or is a big part of that show.
Yeah, part of the fandom. Yeah.
Was that something you were familiar with, or is that part of like the learning curve of getting on that show?
So I guess I don't know which would I be, the Ghost of Christmas Past or Future. I was you when I joined Supernatural. I really didn't know anything about it. Literally, I that shipping dad joke that I just made was the one that I sort of felt when I first heard it. I was like, I don't know what this actually means. I had zero clue. One of the many wonderful things about Supernatural fandom is they are not shy, and they like to educate. And early on, maybe not early on, I think it was year 1 or 2, or year 2 or 3 maybe, when I was on the show, a couple writers joined Twitter, and I had not been part of Twitter. I have a complicated relationship with social media, I guess.
Sure.
But I joined, and very quickly there was a lot of very nice tweets and supportive tweets, and suddenly I had Twitter followers, which I still think is a weird way that we say that.
It's kind of culty.
It's kind of culty, or it's kind of like we're all like mutually stalking one another, which I guess is what we're doing.
Right.
But yeah, they were very quick to educate, and then I met a couple of fans at various conventions, but also I crashed a couple Supernatural conventions, which are completely unique and wonderful experiences, because you and I met at a con, and Comic Cons are a much different thing than Supernatural convention. Like a Supernatural convention is kind of like a really rad sleepover with like 2,000 of your friends, and it's like it's a very cool experience, but it's very different. It's like people are up on stage, there's photo ops, there's autographs, but it's very it's not like there is like a couple of like kind of artist alley type areas where people sell their wares, but it's a much different experience. But I met a couple fans that really kind of walked me through and like held my hand. And I had a similar rather experience to you. I definitely felt old, but I also felt like I've always considered myself a fan or a geek or like,
Sure.
somebody who's like passionate about stuff. And what Supernatural fandom taught me was that like I was remedial at best.
Right.
Like, I was not the AP fan that I thought that I was, and it was a humbling experience, and I'm grateful for the education. And it's also, I think I thought it was a younger experience, the concept of shipping, but that turns out to be 1,000% not true, and which I also thought was really fascinating and really interesting. I'm not a shipper myself. I mean, I guess because I did a panel on shipping with my friend Sam Maggs, and like everyone was talking about their original, their OTP and
One True Pairing.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. I know a lot now. I know way too much.
I literally just had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and somehow shipping came up, or I said shipping, and they didn't know what I meant. And then it basically, my meeting was a 45-minute TED talk on what shipping is,
I would
and
watch
what
that TED talk.
it was kind of amazing. But I kind of lost my train of thought there. I think it was for me on Supernatural. I understood where the shipping was coming from. But oh yeah, when I was on my friend Sam's panel, like for me, shipping, I guess, because they asked me what my OTP was, and I was like, oh, it was probably Dave and Maddie on Moonlighting,
Right.
and later on, Herbert Viola and Mr. Pesto. I don't know those. I guess the portmanteau, the first one would, or however you say that, it would be Dave and Maddie would be Daddy. Which is great. I'm sure that's appropriate. But such a huge part of fandom now, not just Supernatural, but kind of across almost all fandom, and I find it fascinating. I do still sort of feel like, I don't know if this is the right expression, as an outsider looking in on it, but I think it's really cool, and I also think it's fascinating and really inspiring to see people take the narratives that they love and create their own stories with it.
Yeah.
When I was on Supernatural, and this is still true, like I didn't read any fan fiction. People certainly sent me links to it. The reason is largely for legal purposes.
Don't want to get accused of stealing their ideas.
Yeah, and I just can't do it. I do know at one point someone wrote some fan fiction about me and another writer on Supernatural.
Oh my God.
Which he may or may not have clicked the link on, and apparently it was extremely well written and extremely graphic, and it's of our love. But I also think a lot of that is just it's a great way for people to express themselves, but also see themselves in media, which is oftentimes not representative of everybody, and that aspect of it, as I learned more and more about it, I thought it was really cool and really inspiring. It's still something, like I said, as I kind of feel like an outsider looking in, but I'm there cheering everybody on.
Yeah, I feel like in a weird way, I mean, shipping isn't a huge step away from the old will they or won't they type relationships in like sitcoms. It's like, is Sam and Diane so different than you and that writer in Supernatural? I mean, it's just really like, not. I mean, it's
Cheers, by the way. So.
It's kind of like, I mean, it really is in some ways just like that. It's just like everyone has these passion for these characters. It's just like shipping is kind of like it's a term that makes it easier to kind of understand. Although all like the variations, like the bro TP and like OT3, I was just like, oh my God, I'm like, this is blowing my mind right now.
It's a lot, and it's also it's complicated because we've dissolved the the fourth wall. A lot of authors now interact with their readers, and I think a lot of that is really positive, but it creates tricky situations. Some of it is like the more practical legalese, like I can't read fan fiction because, for legal reasons, like we talked about. But then there's also like a weird thing that happens where, whatever story you're trying to tell, if whatever people are guessing about is ultimately them asking you what's going to happen in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And as a staff writer, when you're on a show or you're on the staff of a show, it's very clearly mandated. You cannot spoil what's going to happen on the show. And that means including things that may or may not happen.
Right.
So it creates this weird dynamic where, because you've engaged as a writer, you've also like kind of opened the door to that. And that's also something that you can't answer, but not answering that can be viewed in a very negative light. So it's complicated, and, Twitter is not a great nuanced place for any kind of dialogue. So I definitely, when I first joined Twitter, I had a lot of missteps, and I had a lot of, poor attempts, probably in my case, at humor or trying to deflect. And I've tried to be as nuanced as I can and as open as I can, but it's complicated, and it can be a challenging thing to discuss in the details, particularly when you're on a show that you don't control the destiny of those characters.
Yeah.
So it's tough. But it's also, like I said, like it's hard to not feel. It's exactly what you said. It's that dynamic of will they or won't they. But it also gets, it's also part of a much larger movement of people seeking out representation in the media that they consume, and rightfully so. But yeah, it's a fun one to discuss because I think it's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff involving the creator and viewer dynamic these days, or reader, whatever term you want to use for like the fan side of it. I mean, like a perfect example, and I don't want to get too deep into this because we could go off the rails, but Game of Thrones is in such an odd place right now, just because it's like there's such a dichotomy between what the show is doing and what the fans want the show to do.
Right.
And
Correct.
it's like I feel really bad for DB Weiss and, oh my God, David Benioff. And the reason why for that is like people are just like, God, this would be so much better if like George R. R. Martin had finished the books first. I'm like, you know who wish that he finished the books first more than you? DB Weiss and David Benioff. Because
I'm sure.
yeah, and it's just like it's a really tough spot, and it's just like they're getting killed every week, and it's like I don't know, it's such a tough spot because I don't know what answers would satisfy people, and I honestly don't think there are answers that would satisfy people. There's no perfect answer for fiction anymore, and it makes it really complicated when you blend that with fandom. It's really interesting.
I'm not caught up on the season, so I can't speak to it, but I think there's also, you know, there's a line in Supernatural. There's a character that Rob Benedict plays that's named is Chuck Shirley, and he was created by Eric Kripke, who is the creator of the show, and he's later revealed to be. Sorry if this is a spoiler if you're only on season 2. But
I was just about to start the show. Damn it!
He's later revealed to be God, and he's a writer on the show who actually, in a meta way, has been writing the Sam and Dean story in actual Supernatural books, so they actually find the books.
Oh wow!
You know, and so it's this really fun thing that Eric and the staff at the time created, and I was lucky enough to get to riff on at one point too. But, you know, he has a line which is endings are hard, and he's talking about writing. And I think that's something that we're experiencing with a lot of these things that are coming to an end. I think I can't speak directly to what's you know happening because I'm not caught up. But I think, you know, part of what happens, I think, when shows end is there's a bit of, hey, I don't want this to end. And there's also, as a result of it ending, you know, a real analysis of what's come. And no show is perfect.
Right.
You know, they're all a challenge. You know, I didn't read the Game of Thrones books, but my wife did. And I did find oftentimes when I was like, oh, that was a great scene. She's like, yeah, that was word for the word from the book.
Yeah.
You know, and so like, I'm sure you're right. Like, you know, when you run out of those scenes, you're like, oh, fuck, like, what am I going to adapt now? What am I going to put together? That's also, of course, the challenge and what's fun about adapting things, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think like when shows end, we have, particularly with TV shows, we have such a different relationship with them. You know, Avengers Endgame just came out, and I found it really satisfying. But, you know, it's 22 or whatever movies it is over 11 years. Mm-hmm. We've had a relationship with it. People have grown up with it. People like myself, you know, who grew up, you know, just dreaming about the possibility of those movies and were relegated to like the Spider-Man TV movie when I was a kid, which I love, but is not exactly up to par with, you know, like Far From Home or something like that. You know, like it was so satisfying. But it's different with a TV show, particularly like a network show, but even I think a cable show, because it's in your house. You have this intimate relationship with it, and you therefore, I think, feel a sense of ownership. And I don't think the guys that run Game of Thrones are much online, and I could completely understand why, because there is this sense of ownership that's different. I think it's a little bit more akin to what comics fans feel, because again, you have a weekly relationship with these characters. You're invested with them over a course of years, versus movies which I love and are, you know, the thing I probably love the most. But it's a different relationship I think people have. So I think it's a combination of, like you're saying, like there is an openness now with fans to say like, hey, I could do that better, which I think has always been the case, right? I mean, you go back and read the letters column of an old Marvel book, and they're like, "Dear Sir and or Madam, Fantastic Four sucks, and here's why."
And then you realize it's Kurt Busiek who wrote the letter,
right. Or it's George Double R. Martin.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, so I think there's always been that, but now there's a direct way to address it to the person and to do it pretty quickly.
It changes the game big time.
It does, and I think you combine that with something ending that people are basically a part of. And I'm not saying, I'm sure that the criticism of the show is 100% legitimate. I don't and I'm not caught up, so I can't speak to it.
Sure.
And I 100% support, criticism of any show. But I also think that there's a small part of it, no matter how justified the criticism is that something is ending, and that's painful.
Yeah.
And that's scary, And I think that's okay to have that be part of the conversation. I think that there's been legitimate issues with sexual violence and misogyny with Game of Thrones. Some of it is baked into the material, but some of it has been exploited. And so I'm sure that as those issues are further unpacked and we continue to discuss them as we should, it's going to be a tough conversation, and it may come at the expense of people's passion for a show, and it may come at the expense of the show. But I'm glad we're having the dialogue. At the same time, as a content creator, it can be tough. It can be tough to know what that line is for what you can and can't say. There's also so much drama that goes on behind the scenes that we're not party to. That, for example, a character can get killed off or written off the show, and people can be displeased with how it was done. But there are reasons that may have happened that had nothing to do with story.
Right.
And that's the part that I think it's tough, and it sort of ties back to what I was saying before. When you engage online, there are certain things that you can share, and then there's sometimes you just got to take the beating. You know what I mean? Because there's contractual issues, or there's things outside of your control that you have to say, hey, you know what? That's a completely legitimate criticism. We were actually coming from a different place, but that's not for public discourse, and I got to take my lumps. The content didn't work, or it was problematic, and I need to learn from that and move on. I've certainly had people call me out about stuff, phrasings that I had, or figures of speech that I did not realize were problematic, and I'm grateful for it every time. It's uncomfortable. I feel like garbage, but
it's a learning experience.
It's a learning experience, and I think again, that's the blessing and the curse of this interesting social media age that we're in. And look, it's also a choice. I probably think about quitting Twitter 10 times a day, maybe 12. I don't know about you, but I do feel it helps from a publishing side of things and in terms of a marketing side of things. At the same time, you talk to any social media person, what you're selling is yourself. And that can be complicated, and that can be a strange thing. It's kind of like, when you're at a convention, you are being performative. You have to be on, quote unquote, all the time. But now we're on all the time, 24 hours a day, because that's the thing that we're selling ultimately is ourselves. And I think that's tough. I think it's complicated. I don't think we've worked it all out. There's not a 10-year study to kind of look back and say this is problematic, or this is good, or this is okay.
Yeah.
I think we're living through an interesting moment in the relationship between art and commerce.
My actual day job is at an advertising agency. I'm the digital marketing director who manages online and social media for the company. And I have the nice thing for me is I have a very healthy disconnect emotionally from a lot of this stuff, and I also have some really hard and fast rules that seem really arbitrary to other people, but I think it improves my overall Twitter experience. On my personal Twitter, I only allow myself to follow 150 people because I think any more just seems like an outrageous amount, and I just couldn't keep up. And so I only keep it's funny because if you look through the Twitter, the people who I follow, it's you would probably think I'd follow a lot of comic people. It's mostly sports people, or
right.
I don't know, writers who are doing pop culture personality type stuff. And so it's led to a much more healthy experience. But at the same time, you're in a position where you can't control, it's you have a walkie-talkie that goes one direction, and it goes both directions, but 90% of the time it's only going one direction, which is in. And that's a really interesting place. But let's jump into comics, because I want to get towards Meet the Skrulls, and I want to start with your build up to working in comics, because you are a successful TV writer. You work in that industry. I know a lot of TV writers have jumped into writing comics, and I've always fascinated by people who keep doing it, because it's certainly not for the money. It's certainly not for that reason. No. You grew up reading comics thanks to your older brother, which I think is a fantastic thing. Why are comics something that's so alluring to you as a writer that you want to keep doing it despite, I guess, better opportunities elsewhere?
That's a great question. I think, for me, it's a couple of different things. I mean, you're right. My brother Michael, I mean, he's the guy who brought everything cool into my life. He has been the ultimate tastemaker, and everything from a love of comics to movies to TV has stemmed from the stuff that he brought into the house. Like, my memory is that he taught me how to read reading comics. Because he knew how to read. He's older than me. I'm the youngest of two boys, which was a big reason why Supernatural meant so much to me. But he brought these books in, and there was something about them that they were transportive to me. I remember reading Frank Miller's Ronin, and there's that bit early on in the issue where he's got this sword and he's charging at these two guys with the large hats, and then the next panel is the hats are flying through the air, and that he's chopped their heads off.
Mm-hmm.
But it because you created that image in your mind. It's not in the comic, and that image that you created in your mind can be as violent or not violent, or it can just be that sort of, in film we would say, like, it's like it's just the edit point or whatever. But that, I remember that really sparking my imagination, and it was completely different than the relationship that you have with the moving image, which has the same editorial effect, but you're not looking at a single image. You're not looking at a single image amongst a bunch of images. You're looking at sequential art. And, Scott McCloud talks about, like, that relationship is so unique. And I'm always fascinated by things that I fundamentally don't understand, that seem like magic to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like magic to me. It's the same way with music. Like, I don't have a musical bone in my body. I wish I did. I played trombone, and how they had first and second chair.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there wasn't even a first chair. I was second chair, and I would have to challenge myself, and I would fail. Like, that's how bad I was. But I love music. I write music. It's a big important part of my sort of creative process. And I love them so much. I wish that they were more financially lucrative, because I know now very well and intimately the hard work, particularly on the art side, that goes into creating these things. And they are such a unique art form. I know that there's a lot of overlap in the film and television business, not just from my experience, but as you're seeing everything being adapted and everything being IP farmed from comics. But it is completely unique, and I've never been a golfer, but it was explained to me why golfing is addictive, because you hit one shot and you think you can do it again. And
oh yeah,
I went and played golf once. It was a par 3, this really shitty course, and I sucked. But I hit one shot on a par 3 that was 2 feet from the cup, and I was like, oh my God, I am the greatest golfer in the world. By the way, it took me 8 more shots to sink that 2-foot putt. I realized very quickly. But chasing that sort of feeling that I had reading comics as a kid is sort of the juice that's worth the squeeze for me. It's such a beautiful art form. It's so completely unique, and it takes a lot of things that I love about different art forms, because I do think there's a musical quality to it. I do think there's a filmic quality to it. I do think there's, obviously an ongoing narrative that you find in serialized television as well. But it's also completely its own unique thing. And I've been trying to get into comics forever. I did, and I think I was never asked back again for a reason, due to the How to Break Into Comics the Marvel Way panel.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was Ricky and CB were hosting it. This was years ago. And I think Matt Rosenberg was on it, and maybe Jim Zub. And everyone's telling their origin story about how they got into comics. And these were great stories about, self-publishing and working in a comic shop, and the struggle that everybody has. They go through that, and it wasn't that I didn't have a struggle. I was an animation writer right out of college, and all my animation buddies wanted to get into comics because we all had a love for them, and I wanted to write scripts for them, but I didn't have any money to pay them, and people shouldn't work for free.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't work out for me. But I tried and I failed and I failed, and then I did a backup comic when I worked on the TV show Human Target, and I was like, I've arrived in comics, like Wizard Magazine, here I come. And very quickly I found out, A, Wizard Magazine wasn't being published anymore, but also B, that was not going to be the case. I wasn't going to have a comics career right away. But the story that I told on the panel was, well, I worked on a show called Supernatural, which has been a great experience. An editor at Marvel, Ellie Pyle, happened to like the show. We happened to have friends in common. We became email buddies, and then she sent me an email asking me if I wanted to pitch on Spider-Verse. And I was like, and that's how I broke into Marvel Comics. So I guess get a job on Supernatural, make sure that one of the editors at Marvel likes Supernatural, and then that's how you do it. Which I was being facetious, but it's like, everybody's path to comics is pretty unique, I think. It's always like a different tale. But I had wanted to get into comics since I was a kid. I used to try to draw. I was awful. I listened to the podcast you did with Ryan Stegman, a fellow Michigander, and maybe the tallest man in comics. Certainly the most handsome. But
God, I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast.
No, I hope he does. I want him to hear it from me. But he had the thing you guys were talking about, like how he learned how to sketch with the circles and like you see in the How to Draw Comics the Marvel way. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, neither could I.
And I would copy stuff. So I have notebooks filled with Todd McFarlane knockoffs, of just copying it. And I would copy panels, but in my own order and tell my own comic book story. Like I did a assignment for school that way. I made a birthday card for my brother, or no, graduation card for my brother that way. But I was just copying, and I think I learned a lot about sequential art, but I didn't learn how to draw. And so I tried getting into comics that way, and I failed. And again, like I said, over the years, I just think it's an incredible medium. And I think, I think we're actually in a kind of a really unique kind of golden age right now.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to be even a tiny, tiny part of that. Cause I think comics are in a really interesting and pretty cool spot right now.
I'm glad that you said, you mentioned that there's a musicality to comics sometimes. I also feel like that. And I want to specifically tout one of your previous collaborators. I think the most musical artist in comics is Javier Rodriguez.
Oh, hands down. Hands down. Well, he's a musician.
Yeah, so. Yeah. But I mean, but if you look at his panels, I don't know what there is. It's like jazz. If it was influenced by Steve Ditko, I don't know what it is.
I had such a Javier is, and I know this word gets thrown around a lot these days, but he is a true genius. Yeah. I was so excited to work with him, and I reached out to a buddy of mine, Dennis, formerly Hopeless.
Yeah.
And he had worked with
on Spider-Woman.
On Spider-Woman, and I love that book. And I was like, I do this with any new artist. I ask other friends that have collaborated, and I was like, well, what do I do? And Dennis was great. He was like, just get out of his way.
Yeah.
And I had gotten a couple of scripts when I started that were very intimidating. Like it was like Mark Waid's Daredevil #1. And I was like, thanks, Ellie. I guess I'll just retire now. This was so
I don't know how to do that.
I was like, I can't do that. I mean, I copied his format. But then when I was jumping on Doctor Strange to catch up with what Jason and Chris were doing in the flagship book, he sent me a bunch of Jason scripts that Jason had written specifically for Chris. And they really changed the way I wrote comics. I mean, Jason's, I think, is, I've yet to read a bad comic book by that guy. And his scripts are really, really beautifully, at least for the ones, I've only read the ones for Doctor Strange, but he would do a thing where it was like page 1 through 3, and then there was like a subheading, Doctor Strange's, this isn't what it was, but like Doctor Strange's library. And then he would just write the scene almost like screenplay format. And you could see where he was implying what a panel count could be. Mm-hmm. But he was also there would be scenes that there would be like a fight scene. And he would just kind of give Chris the room to play.
Right.
And so I reached out to Javier. And then eventually, actually around that time, my wife and I were in Spain, and we got to meet him and his lovely family. And we all hung out. And it was great. And we kind of just came to that agreement, because I wanted to follow Dennis's advice, but I also really wanted to try the way that Jason had written those scripts. And it was great, because I would say page 1 through 3. And sometimes I would just be like, here's what I think happens, but I'm just going to give you the dialogue and the beats that I need for this scene, page 1 through 3, or sometimes page 1 through 6. And I just try to create as much room and runway for him to play. And man, those layouts that I got back, even from the first issue, there's this weird, I was like, they travel through time. And I was like, Javier, I don't know what magical time traveling looks like, but I'm sure you do. And I was like, but here's the dialogue. And he created this 2-page spread, which, Alvaro did amazing inks on, and Jordi did unreal colors on. Mm-hmm. And if I had written that, I couldn't have written it. He just riffed on this idea of magical time travel, and it's them in different eras and different shapes and sizes. It's exactly what you said. It's Ditko meets jazz, and it's something that only Javier could have done. I could not have scripted that. Yes, I provided the dialogue, and I felt like I was like Goose to his Maverick, setting him up to Spike in the volleyball game. Like I definitely set a table for him, but I didn't put anything on that table. That's all Javi. I mean, like he is a real genius.
You gave him like a little bit of kindling, and he made like the Burning Man thing that they light on fire.
He literally burned the world down. Like it's some of the layouts, and they'll pop up once in a while on Twitter. People are like, how did I miss this book? And I feel obviously the same way because it was canceled. But his layouts in that book, we always ended up doing one or two-page spreads that were just jaw-dropping. And then it was his idea because I was like, what do you want to do? Is there anything you want to do, like a story you want to tell? And he's like, and we started talking about Choose Your Own Adventures and how we loved them as kids. And so we did a Choose Your Own Adventure issue as well, which like was really fascinating to collaborate on because there was a lot of math to figuring out the branching narrative. But then he figured out these really amazing visual cues to kind of, my favorite thing is going through the art and doing my lettering pass and realizing how much dialogue and description I can take out and just get the hell out of their way. But he found all these really, really smart ways to guide your eye and give you clues and how to get readers to make choices within the narrative that were just brilliant.
Yeah,
he's a genius, and it is exactly what you said. It's this musical quality that he brings to it.
I could keep going on Javier Rodriguez for forever. That guy is like one of my favorites. But
I can't wait for the new book he's doing.
Oh God, it's gonna be so good. I can't go down that path. I'll be on that path for the rest of my life. It's gonna be so good. I mean, he is a perfect fit for that book, and Mark Waid doing that is a perfect fit too. But
I can't wait.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a second to talk about my friends at TKO Studios. TKO Studios is a new comic publisher that launched with what the New York Times calls an impressive slate of talent. They publish books by top creators, including Roxane Gay, Jeff Lemire, Garth Ennis, Gabriel Walta, and many more. TKO also does things differently than other publishers. They binge release their books and offer each title in whatever format you most enjoy reading your comics in, whether that's a 6-issue set in a collector's box, trade paperback, or digital download. I'm a single issues guy, so I went that route and I love the collector's box. Even better, all of TKO's first issues are free to read at tkopresents.com right now. So if you're curious, visit tkopresents.com to give them a try or follow at TKO Presents across all social platforms. And if you're a store that's interested in stocking TKO's books, email retailers at tkopresents.com to learn more about one of the best retailer deals in the industry. And now, back to the show. So let's talk about Meet the Skrulls.
Yeah.
It is, I haven't, been tabulating my list or anything like that, but it's absolutely one of my favorite comics of the year. I love it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to do a spiel from the synopsis for the first issue. The Warners are your typical family. This is what it's about, listeners. It's by Robbie and Niko Henrichon, who is an amazing artist. And I actually we're going to get into this, but I think this is he's done really great work for Marvel, but I think this is the best fitting book that he's ever had for him here.
Wow.
So the synopsis for the first issue and really the series is: the Warners are your typical family. Dad works at Stark, Mom works in a senator's office. Jennifer and Alice are students at Stamford High School. The only thing that makes them different is that they're shape-shifting Skrulls and have infiltrated our society to pave the way for a Skrull invasion. That's like the general gist of it, but there's also all kinds of shenanigans involving Project Blossom, which is a government thing that's looking to find out all the Skrulls in the world. And it's, the common comparison, and one that you even made, is that it's like the Americans.
Yeah.
So I want to start with the origin of it, because the thing that I think is really interesting about the book is from like a naked, cynical view of it. It's just like, oh, this is just happening because of Captain Marvel and the fact Skrulls were in there. But you actually pitched Marvel about it. Like, what was the origin of this book, and what made it something you wanted to pitch?
So I've been doing a lot of work for Marvel, and I think I was in the midst of, I did all these legacy primer pages that were like these 3-page origins.
I remember.
And it was super fun. I got to work with artists that I couldn't believe, but I was like, I'm not sure what stories I'm telling right now in my life, and I really wanted to try to find, one of, I think, the best Marvel books. It's certainly one of the best ones on the stands right now, but one of the best Marvel books over the last, whatever it has been, 20 years, was Runaways.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the many things I love about that book, and it's certainly what I love about it now, because I think, Rainbow and Chris have just been, and Matt have just been killing that book, in the good way, in the young millennial way. Sorry, um, um, is that it was original. It was like a new batch of characters, and it felt very much in keeping with the Marvel sort of mold. Personal stories with ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, or vice versa.
The world outside your window.
A world outside your window. That's right. um, and it felt fresh in a way that I was like always really exciting to me. And so I've always had that in the back of my mind. And for the longest time, the goal for me working in comics is ultimately to do creator owned. But I haven't really felt it's something I want to dip my toe into this year finally. But I'm a big believer in like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours yet. And I'm certainly not at 10,000 comics. I'm not, nor will I ever be Mark Waid unless I start writing 10 comics a day for the rest of my life. But I wanted to try to do something original, and that was also like not what I had written for Marvel so far. Like I've really loved and I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had there, but I wanted to do something that was maybe a little bit more personal. So it's funny when when it all timed out with the Captain Marvel movie. I'm sure that probably was part of whatever internal debate was getting the book approved. But I actually pitched it a long time ago. The idea came to me because I've always loved, on a practical, very literal level, the Skrulls.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember reading that. I'm blanking on the number, but it was a Fantastic Four annual that John Byrne did, where they go to that small town and it's the cows that were turned into Skrulls. And
yeah,
it's such a creepy, fun, like Twilight Zone style episode. And I've always, this is gonna sound weird, but like I always thought the Skrulls looked cute, like that original like. And I was like, one of them has to be nice. Like as a kid, I was like, they kind of look like gremlins. Maybe one of them could be my friend. And it's not that I wanted to redeem them or anything like that, but I always think, the villain is never the villain of their own story. They're the hero.
It's a matter of perspective.
It's totally a matter of perspective. And I love writing stories that are about identity, and I love writing stories that are about family. I'm incredibly blessed. I've been incredibly blessed twice in my life. I was born into a great family, and I married into a great family, and I'm very close with my family. And as much as I love them, families have drama that's inherent. And I just started thinking about a family of Skrulls, and the two images that popped into mind are actually in the first and second issue. The first one was I was rereading Watchmen because it's like a court ordered thing if you're a comic fan, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
But
it's legally required for sure.
And I was looking at a couple of the sequences in that, and that image that is in the second issue now of Alice looking in the mirror.
Oh, it's such a good. I wrote that down as I was rereading it last night. I was like the 9-page grid or a 9-panel grid.
Yeah, and that was like the first thing that popped into my mind. And then the other one was what essentially opens the book after the sort of like little cold open where Alice is getting picked on, which is her going home, and
she's on the phone.
Yeah, and it's like, get off your phone, and then you think it's about the phone, and then she transforms, and then there's that wide 2-page spread of them praying. And my family, no matter what was going on when I was a kid, we would all have dinner together. Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a common communal experience, or at least I hope it is for people. And I thought like it was a way to just instantly sort of humanize them. Yeah. I didn't have the bare bones of the story. I've mostly worked, in the Spidey office, and, Nick Lowe, who has been a very generous and patient teacher as a kind of, put in my Malcolm Gladwell hours. He had asked at one point, I think I had asked about what was next for me there, because I was just trying to figure out, what my role was there. And I asked if I could pitch something, and he said, yeah. And I pitched him just the elevator pitch of this, family of Skrulls. It's the Americans in the Marvel Universe. And he was like, oh, I love that. That's cool. And then, life happened, and I was writing other books for them. But we kept kind of circling back to it. And then suddenly he was like, hey, I think we should do this. I think I have an artist in mind. Do you know Niko? And I don't know him. I didn't know him at the time personally, but I was a huge fan. I mean, since Pride on. Yeah. And I think I just read something he had done for Humanoids that was just stunning, just gorgeous. And I was like, oh, that's cool, because I knew I wanted to flash back to the Skrull Empire and their time off of Earth, and I really wanted that sort of push pull that he can provide, because he's such a unique artist and such a wonderful artist. And then I got really excited, and then he was like, and then Marcos Martin is going to do covers, and I was like, oh my god, I need to lay down. And Travis is going to do letters. I was like, holy buckets, this feels like a really cool opportunity. And then really early on in the process, I hadn't finished working on the pitch document, but he sort of had told Niko what the characters were going to sort of be and the dynamics were going to be, and Niko gave us these sketches. And this has happened to me once before. It happened with Scott Hepburn when I was on Spider-Man Deadpool. We did a story where it was like Spider-Man and Deadpool in the future, where they were like living in a retirement home together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was originally going to be kind of a goofier story, but Scott did these sketches that were so like personal and humanized them, and just added this extra layer of like sad, I guess.
Yeah.
And it really changed the story. And it was a similar experience here, where I knew this was going to be, a darker story, and certainly not, it's not the stuff that I've necessarily written for Marvel before. But it really informed the rest of that pitch document in every script sense, and I'm in my office now, and I have them printed out, and I always kind of use them as sort of like a touchstone, because his first, I think one of the characters had a different name at the time. But his first impressions were my first impressions of the character too, or the characters too. And so that really, really, really informed the book. But it just came from a place of, I really wanted to tell a story about family dynamics and identity, and also, from a practical standpoint, wanting to try to take a bigger swing at Marvel.
Yeah. It's such an interesting book, if only because it's so atypical for Marvel. I mean, right. I would say its closest analog is really the Vision. Right. And not for the obvious like family dynamics. It's really just like the feel to it. Like there's a whole lot of it that like just really feels like that. But I mean, it's a mini series. Like it doesn't even have like a Vision level character. It has like 4 Skrulls that no one's ever heard of. It has no real connection to anything. I mean, like if somebody wanted to say it had a Captain Marvel connection, I would invite them to find it in the comic.
Right. It's funny too, because I went and saw the movie, and I will try to avoid spoilers, but I was not aware of how they were going to depict the Skrulls in the movie. Yeah. But by that point, I was almost done writing the series. So I was like, oh, what does this mean? Is this okay? And it ended up working out, but it's a pretty tangential connection to the movie, if at all.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the other thing I was going to mention is something you underlined. It's like, and this is absolutely no slander to your other work, because I've been like, I really enjoyed Silk. Silk was a really great book.
Yeah.
But this is I don't know you that well, but my weird perspective is this is the most you out of any book you've ever done for Marvel.
It's 100% true. I mean, there's a lot of, early on in the process of writing Silk, I wrote my first script, and Ellie was like, hey, this is good. I have some notes, but like, what is she thinking? And I was like, what? And she's like, we can do captions. And, in TV and movies, voiceover is really frowned upon.
Right.
And it ended up changing the book, because I started writing her captions, and then I realized it was in my pitch document, but I really wanted to talk about mental health. I'm a person who deals with anxiety and panic attacks, and so I wanted to kind of address that head on. I've never been locked in a bunker. I don't have spider powers, so it's not really me. But there's aspects of that are me. There's certainly some goof-ass elements in Spider-Man Deadpool that are me, and obviously, this is a spoiler, but I appear in the 50th issue of Spider-Man Deadpool, so obviously there's a little bit of me in there too.
Are you Adam X the Extreme?
No, it's already on stands. I end up revealed as the villain of the story.
Oh, okay.
An idea that Nick Lowe had. We went pretty Grant Morrison and pretty very, very silly. But your assessment is correct. I mean, like, this was something that I wanted to, inject more of myself in. Like I said, I have a great family. They weren't Skrulls to my knowledge. But there's a lot of, the dynamics of family that I wanted to write about, having grown up in. Even in a great family, there's always this tension. And I think that sort of, the struggle to find yourself, there's a little alien in all of us.
Yeah, yeah.
We all feel a little out there and a little different at times. And so, yeah, like I'm glad that shone through, and I hope it shines through to the end. Like, I definitely wanted to tell a more personal story, more me.
I think it's really funny too that like the two of the things that you said were like real moments for you for understanding, or like what you envisioned for the book. The first and second issue, you had the 9-panel grid, and you had the moment where Alice comes to the table and she's got her phone, and they're like not at the table, and then it's actually her transforming into a Skrull. That's two of the three moments I had that I was just like, this is something different. My other moment that I really love is when they have like a whole tiff at the table and everybody leaves besides Madison, who stays there, and then as she's sitting by herself, she changes back into Madison the human rather than Madison the Skrull.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, family is a huge theme, but also I think one of the interesting themes of the book is identity, and it's like how you define yourself. And it's like there's this line, and I don't really consider this a spoiler, so I think it's in the third issue, and it's Gloria, the mother, is talking to her two kids, Alice and Madison, in the car, and she was just like talking about how like they were raising them and thinking about how like they were worried that Earth was going to change them, but in reality they just turned them into small versions of themselves. And it's just really interesting because there's like a lot about being a parent, but also just about how your environment can change you, and like maybe not change you for the worse, because it's like I feel like, I don't know, especially Gloria, it feels like she has been changed to a certain degree by Earth in how she views familial relationships, because like let's face it, throughout the entirety of Skrull existence, they're not exactly like the type of people who actually sit at dinner tables and have conversations.
No, it's not an episode of Family Ties. Do you know what I mean? It's never been depicted as a loving environment, and that's true, and that's something that we talked about, wanting it to feel like in a subtle way, each character had been affected by it, and it's something that Nick and Kathleen and I talked about, of trying not to ascribe anything being good or bad about it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Totally.
To let the audience have their own justification or interpretation of it, because it is about identity. It is about, like, it's funny that moment we debated about when Madison transforms back, like what it meant, and because we were looking at there were a lot of eyes on that first issue, which was great. We had a lot of other editors that weighed in, and it was really great getting their perspective, even in a sort of final form. And that one came up a couple times, and ultimately it was about her. As you see in subsequent issues, like, she seems like the one who's ready for prime time, but she's not. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why is that she is kind of, she kind of wants to go to homecoming.
She self-identifies as a human. Yeah,
and that it was important for the audience to see that, and not her family. It's like I had a great teacher in college. His name was Abraham Polanski, and he was a really amazing screenwriter. He was actually a blacklisted screenwriter, and I was asking him one time. I was his driver. That was like my job. It was like one of the best classes I had, actually. And I remember I was telling him about a script problem that I was having with the script that I was writing for school, and he talked about his advice, and it's something that's stayed with me, is like these private moments that characters have just with the audience but not with the other characters are really informative, and they really create a relationship with the character, and it can be a positive one, it can be a negative one depending on context, obviously, but it's one of those notes that really kind of opened my eyes to like the relationships that we have with characters as audience members, and it's something I've always kind of strived for, and that's kind of where that moment came from, was exactly what you said, like she's putting on this one face for her family, but alone she's like, I don't know, maybe I do want to go to homecoming, maybe I do want to be popular.
She's really good at being a mean girl.
Yeah, she's really good at it, and enjoys it. And so again, like, that was one of those ways in which we wanted it to be, you can take it both ways. You can say like, oh, well, it's not cool she's a mean girl, but it's also interesting that she's, finding herself, good or bad,
Yeah. I want to bring up the 9-panel grid again, just because it's a fantastic moment, and I love how you use the 9-panel grid. Like, 9-panel grids are really hit or miss for me, but it is reminiscent of, it's reminiscent of something. It wasn't Watchmen that came up in my mind. It reminded me, and this is like the worst thing it could possibly remind me of, but it works for me still. It reminded me of Hairstar trying on hats in Preacher.
Oh yeah.
Like
Totally.
100%, like, because it's like a mirror scene and it's just like her trying on faces. But I don't know. I mean, like, thematically, like, that's why it's such an interesting book to me, is because, like, I wrote a big oral history of the Marvel cosmic book event, Annihilation, and I talked to
Yeah.
Javier Rodriguez, Mark's Watch, for it, and he did the Super Scroll book, and like we were talking about how, like, you know, scrolls are interesting because, like, they're kind of all fluid, like how they identify can change, and so it's like. It, like, even genders can change very easily,
Yeah,
and it's like these characters are all really interesting because they're having to figure out what their own identity means on a planet that they're not familiar with, and it's really it's fascinating, like that whole thing combined with, like, the general theme, in which, like, I love how you brought this back in the fourth issue of the family is the mission. Like, those two, just I think those are kind of like the ties that bind for, like, the whole series to me.
Yeah. It's funny. And thank you. It's always good to hear, like, things actually landing. But I think you're dead right about the Skrulls. Like, I think that's why there are characters like Data on Next Gen, or on the show I used to work on, Supernatural. There's a character called Castiel, where we really kind of, a lot of times audience will imprint themselves onto the character. And I think that's what happens sometimes in cool shapeshifter stories, because they can kind of be anybody. And there is a point in our lives, sometimes several times, where we can be anybody, can actually transform. And I think for the most part, it's probably in your teen years. But yeah, she's trying on identities, she's trying on faces. And, it's one thing to write that, but it's another to see, what Niko and Loren and at one point we're like, someone was like, do we put dialogue here? And I was like, no, I don't think we need anything. It's like the images that they created, were so, and there's a lot of really subtle color changes in it as well. Like on the last row, that, again, this was not scripted, where she's a Skrull and then she's a Skrull again, and her face is a little tighter, but her skin is kind of registering a little bit more red. You can read it as embarrassment or anger or whatever, and then the last panel is that she punched the mirror.
Right.
And that's all Niko. Like, those are all choices that he made, that really, again, it's like, this is when you asked before, like, what I love about comics, and it's exactly that. Like, all my favorite moments are like these moments that come from collaboration. It's the same in TV and movies, but there's 200-300 collaborators there. And this, it's just like the six of us.
I think it's funny. I normally write I just write notes for myself for interviews. And for Niko, his one was really simple. I just wrote 4 words: Niko Henrichon, a god. And, and I'm like, that's just a reminder to bring up how he's incredible. But
Confirmed.
I mean, the interesting thing about him on this book is, like, it's not. I'm not going to say it's like a diametrically opposite styles. I mean, it's certainly different than Pride of Baghdad, the book he did with Brian K. Vaughan. But the interesting thing is like, his style for this really reminds me, and not to compare this to the Vision again, but it's like, I called it like Gabriel Hernandez Walta meets Vanessa Del Rey. And it's a nice fusion of those styles that has, like, this deeply personal feel to it. And, like, his character work throughout is just absolutely incredible. I mean,
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting because, like, one of the things I always think, when you look at a book and you kind of wonder whether or not this comic would be the same with a different artist, like, it's another one that's kind of hard to imagine somebody else doing the things that Niko does with this book.
I couldn't. I mean, again, I'm obviously biased, but, like, the book really began when I saw those images that he created of the characters, like those character sketches, which I hope they put in the trade. Because you got a sense of who these kids and this family was before I'd written anything, and I always go back to them. And there's a really cool quality to his work where he can, even when he's rendering someone there's human, it also has almost like an alien quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same when he's doing them as full on Skrulls. Like, the fear that I had about this book, was, when you have shapeshifters, are you going to be able to identify with them as they shift shapes. Like at one second they're security guard, the next second they're themselves, the next second they're Tony Stark. Like how do we do that? But Niko really found a way in every single issue. Sometimes with working with the color to kind of push your eye to realize that, oh, like that's who that is, and things like that. But so much of it was the expression and exactly what you said, the character work. Like, again, my background is movies and TV, and artists on comics, like they are doing the job of 200 people, and most importantly, they are your performers. And the character work that's done is crucial, especially in a book like this, which I think Niko said in an interview that we did together. He's like, I haven't drawn this many interiors of a house in a comic ever. And it does. It has, like, from a TV standpoint, like I guess it was like our standing set, as we say. But it needed somebody who understood how to communicate a lot with a little. And I can't tell you, like, his layouts are so amazing. Again, I hope they're included, because a lot of times artists will do their layouts, their roughs, and they'll kind of put balloons in where the dialogue may be. But he would actually like cut and paste the dialogue, and it wasn't like perfectly lettered. But I really got a sense on each page of what he was doing early on, and it really helped me largely just take stuff out, like things that were I was either over explaining it, or there was a couple scenes I rewrote because his art was so much more nuanced than what I wrote. And it just didn't need me hitting people over the head. They're so rich, like already as you're looking at them, like I can print them out and I can see and feel the cover, the whole comic.
Yeah.
And each phrase is, it's like, and like suddenly like there's inks and you're like, oh my God. And then like suddenly it's all colors, because he just kind of gives them to you all at once. And it's just like this massive, like almost info dump, like really, really fast. And we had done an interview for Panel X Panel where I got to ask him a little bit more about his process, and it was really interesting to hear how he approaches it. And I've always been a huge fan, and I knew that he was a special artist. But there's that unique thing when it was similar working with Javi and on Sorcerers, like to get to see the process of how their brains work, it really is magic to me, and it is like sitting in and watching like just a musician just sort of play, and then suddenly you're like, oh wait, that's Blackbird by the Beatles, like like you're watching that song being created, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just amazing to watch them create in real time. It was, and then Travis would come in and he did a really cool thing which I've never done or seen done on a book before. He actually like created all these almost like different, palette's not the right word, but different iterations of what everyone's sort of voice would look like,
right?
What type of lettering and what type of captions for each character. Like he really created the voices for all of these characters. And again, it was something, I think we did after the first script, but it really informed how I wrote, the subsequent ones, because I could hear them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, really quick, I just have to say, I want to thank you, because you were the second person. I always would call Panel X Panel, but I think it's actually Panel by Panel. I had Haas on the podcast.
Don't tell Haas.
I know, I had him on the podcast, and I was like, oh, so what did you start Panel X Panel? He's like, oh, I started Panel by Panel. I was like, oh my God, it's Panel by Panel. Oh my God. Anyways, but no, I mean, I always call artists wizards, just because I always wanted to be an artist. That was the thing I wanted to be when I was a kid. And I was like, I cannot be an artist because I'm terrible at this. But it is really amazing to see what they come up with. I just have a couple more questions before we jump into 5 questions about you. I have to bring up one of the things that you research the most with, because, one of the interesting things about the Skrulls is to, for the most part, they've never really gotten this kind of focus. They're just these dudes who are bad guys, or these aliens who are bad guys, or they're just, I don't know, like they're Elijah from Fantastic Four. Yeah. That's basically the long and the short of the Skrulls. You read, one of the things you said was the biggest influence was reading Secret Invasion. It was the biggest part of your research. And that is really interesting to me, because for the most part, that is an event comic that is very bombastic, that had a single focus on them being a villain.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, I mean, like, one of the things that people sleep on about that event is that some of the tie-in titles were actually incredible. Like the Black Panther arc from Jason Aaron and Hefty Apollo is like straight up one of like the best event tie-ins that's ever existed. How did that play a part into your thinking? Because like I would never, I mean, besides the fact it involves scrolls, I never would have guessed that as being a thing.
Well, when you go through, like, the scroll stuff, like Scroll Kill Crew and obviously the Kree Scroll War, like a lot of it isn't really focused on them. And there's some stuff like you mentioned Annihilation, but they are exactly what you said. They're like these they're like bugs eating a plant. You know what I mean? Like there's not there's not a lot of nuance.
Right.
And look, the Secret Invasion, the actual like flagship book, is a bit more of obviously a blunt instrument as well. But there was a couple things about it, that specific one that fascinated me. Like there was a sense of religion,
Yeah.
and there was a sense of predestiny that I didn't think had been exploited before in that way. I mean, I guess it had, but like it just really kind of brought it to the forefront. So that really intrigued me, and so much of the focus in both the event and the aftermath was what it was like to be, for the people that had been replaced,
Oh, yeah.
and then obviously the people that had those relationships. But I was like, what did that look like on the other side? Like, and did people have doubts? Like someone must have been like, maybe this is really shitty and creepy, And also, like, I was really fixated on this idea of, there's this great quote that I quote all the time, probably incorrectly, but Kurt Vonnegut in Mother Night, which is like, be careful what you pretend to be, because in the end you are what you pretend to be.
Right.
And in that case, it was a guy, obviously it's about like, if you try to pretend to have, or to espouse these negative thoughts, just because you're doing it for the good reasons, you're eventually going to get consumed by those negative thoughts. But I thought, like, well, what would that look like in the opposite? Like, if I'm the bad guy, but I was sent amongst people that are ostensibly good, wouldn't that have an effect on me in some way, shape, or form, no matter how bug-like I might be as a species? I'm not saying like the Skrulls have been depicted like bees, but they don't individuate a lot.
No.
And part of, I think, the nature of identity is individuating, is finding that, like, hey, I love my family, but I'm different.
Right.
I'm a little weird. Like I had, the best dad in the world. I have a great family, but there was times when I didn't get along with him because I had long hair and I listened to music that he did not like. And I read comics, which he wasn't a fan of. So like there are those moments in your life where you just sort of individuate and you say like, hey, I'm weird, I'm different, and I hope that you accept me that way, which he did, God bless. I was very fortunate, like I said. But you do individuate. And I thought, like, what would that look like from a Skrull perspective? But then to your point, the spin-offs that came out of all of those were so fascinating. Mm-hmm. Look, I've only had to write to an event once, and it's really hard. Like I was writing a book called Venom Space Knight, but they were like, poor Jake, God bless him. Jake is a great editor at Marvel. And I remember him telling me I had to do that. And I was like, oh shit. Cause it was like, we were Venom Space Knight, but we had to come to Earth. And I was like, well, he's neither a space or a knight right now. So this is going to be
just Venom.
Yeah. But fortunately Jake is a great editor, and he's like 2 words, spider and man. And that's all you need for a Venom book. Mm-hmm. So that worked out. But it's really hard when you're writing for these events to bring something kind of new to the table, or something that's subtle or has some nuance to it. But I really felt a lot of because they weren't burdened like the flagship event book was with, like, us good then bad, they could kind of explore some more of the darker aspects of the premise, because the premise is dark and messed up and weird and creepy. And I certainly hope that they explore that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because it's interesting.
Yeah.
But I was really inspired by a lot of those, like, sort of spin-off books. Like a lot of them were really interesting and had just stuff that, like, kind of like you were saying before, and I appreciate it. Like, it didn't feel like a traditional, like, Marvel story.
Right.
That weren't afraid to be a little darker, a little bit more quote unquote adult, or pay cable, not network.
I rep hard for that Black Panther one. It's really great. Good. I mean, it's both an atypical Black Panther story and an atypical Skrull story. Exactly. And it actually in some ways reminds me of kind of how you approach Meet the Skrulls. Like you talked about how you kind of subtract some of the dialogue, but like that was a very quiet book. It was very and it's not action driven so much as like like, I don't even know how to properly phrase it, but it was like a lot of the story was relayed through Hefty Paulo's art. And like it worked because of the type of story it was, but it's just, I don't know, that is just a phenomenal. I think it was only like 2 issues, but it was so good.
It's great, and I think it's a great example of in success what some of these event tie-in books can really do. I really think that series. I really love that one, and I really loved Original Sin because the net result spin-offs felt like they had weight.
Yeah,
and they felt like they were. Obviously, I'm biased because Silk came out of Original Sin, but I thought a lot of those stories were so interesting, and the event was cool. But the byproducts and then the aftermath was even more interesting in some ways.
My favorite part about that event is the fact that it is an absolutely insane event when you really think about it.
Oh,
it's like a giant eye guy has stolen the eye of the Watcher, and then it turns out Nick Fury is actually super old and there's all his LMDs. Apologies for all the people I just spoiled Original Sin for, but I feel I'm well within my reach.
It was so good.
I want to mention one individuating thing that I really liked. The first issue, there's this moment where they're at the table and they're all mad at Alice, and she's really sad about the fact that these mean girls smashed a caterpillar. And it's a really interesting moment because it's there's a real humanity that shines through there, and it's Mark, the father, is deeply upset about this. He views that as weakness, and he's just, or excuse me, Carl, apologies. Yeah. Carl, the father, views this as weakness, and it's just, but that's who she is. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, it's those types of things could happen with a normal family. It's just, these happen to be Skrulls. I don't know. That's why I think it's such a fascinating book, is there's all these proxy moments where it could be human. It's all these characters that are Skrulls are struggling because they're kind of becoming human. And it's odd. I mean, it's really fascinating.
It's a fun dynamic to play in, and it's something that I'm really fortunate. I work with great editors on the book, Nick and Kathleen, and they've done a really. It's been an interesting process as we've kind of reacted to the art sort of as a group, because there's been times when I've wanted to, I don't know what the right word is, be more redemptive with some of the characters or kind of pull back. And it's been interesting at different points. We've all kind of tried to do that, but then another they'll be oh no, they could be meaner, or they can the style can be a little rougher. Kathleen had a great pitch in the second issue for just kind of how younger teen girls talk, and it was such a great idea. But my first reaction was oh, that seems really mean. I was oh right, no, but that's okay. That's okay.
Because they are mean.
It's okay, and it's also it's I was a teen once a gazillion years ago, and I do remember lashing out for no reason. And it's been fun as a dynamic, because that sometimes we're protective of the characters, and then you don't want to be overprotective of characters because you don't want to prevent their growth or prevent them from being interesting.
Yeah.
But I got to give credit to Nick and Kathleen, particularly Nick too, because I don't know how this works when they're selling the books to the to the upper levels of Marvel. Nick's a senior executive, whatever. It's not he's not an upper level, but I know that there's a certain conversation that has to happen. And I was both thrilled and pleasantly surprised when we got the green light to do 5 issues. So it was pretty exciting.
He helped to get Next Wave. He was the guy behind Next Wave, basically.
Yeah.
And if he can get Next Wave approved, I think he can get a lot approved. All right. Well, let's close with 5 questions about you. So I want to start with when I was reading interviews with you, you were talking about writing music, and you talked about Max Richter, who I absolutely love, and he did The Leftovers and all this stuff like that. I don't remember which project you listened to that for, but it did make me wonder. Did you have a personal soundtrack or something you listened to while writing Meet the Skrulls?
I did listen to Max Richter again. I can't remember the name of the record. He did one where he recomposed a bunch of classical stuff. It was that, and then I don't want to look at the play count for The Leftovers, but
oh god, yeah,
it's probably pretty high. But yeah, it was Max Richter again, and there was a couple other little songs here and there. I listened. Sometimes it's antithetical, and when I was writing, I can't remember which issue, but Robin's new record dropped, and there was one song on there. I'm blanking on the name of it, that I must have listened to a million times. That's usually for process stuff. I like to go for walks and I'll listen to the same song on repeat. but think about the same problem on repeat too.
Sure.
But if I'm sitting in front of the laptop, it's got to be no lyrics.
Yeah.
I can't focus. Like all my artist friends, we were talking before about how, all of Ireland and being friends with all of Ireland's amazing artistic community. Like they always talk about like, oh, I listen to this podcast, or oh, I rewatched The Wire. I'm like, man, fuck you. I can't do any of that stuff. I do now on walks. Like I've listened to your podcast on many a walk. Or I'll listen to a song or like an audiobook or something like that. But I can't work a problem when there's lyrics. I wish I could, but I just can't.
Yeah, I did a podcast at Emerald City this year with a couple artists who I actually am in like a perpetual Twitter DM thread where we just talk about basketball because they watch basketball while they draw. And it's like obviously you couldn't do that. That would just be impossible.
No, I've had occasionally like a hockey, because I'm more of a hockey guy.
Sure.
Who's your basketball team?
I'm weirdly the Indiana Pacers. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm Indiana Pacers fan. Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because you and Ryan talked about the Malice and the Palace.
Oh God, yeah, we did. Oof.
Oh, God, so amazing. I loved his answer when he was like Ron Artest. I was like, that's the right answer.
Is it though? It is. I mean, as soon as you jump into the stands to fight fans, I'm pretty sure you're the bad guy.
You have ended all claims to being a good person.
Well, that's why he rebranded Meta World Peace.
Yeah, he brought the peace.
Exactly. So next question, I'm going to ask you probably the most impossible question for you to answer. I feel like you can do it though, because maybe you're a ranking guy. Okay, so your OTF, your one true fandom, is of Star Wars. So if you were challenged to say in no order, but your 3 favorite Star Wars movies, could you do it?
Yeah, I could. It's funny. I was just talking about this because I may or may not have watched again the despecialized edition of the original trilogy.
Oh God, I wish I had that.
I may or may not have found a way to do that.
I want that so bad.
Deny. But, it's funny. I respect everybody's rankings, but I think it's chronological order of the original series.
It's New Hope, Empire, and Return.
Or as we called it, Star Wars, Empire, and Return of the Jedi when it came out. Which is amazing when you watch the despecialized version, because it doesn't even say, Chapter 4. Like, none of that was there when I saw it as a kid.
Right.
That was all added later.
It'd be really weird if it said A New Hope the first time it showed up, or like Chapter 4. You're like, wait, where's Chapter 1, 2, and 3?
You're like, what the? But then, by the way, when it was re-released, and it did say that, we were like, oh my God, there's more. Like, we blew our minds. Like, the internet when I was a kid was Starlog and Fangoria magazine, and we just devoured that shit. But yeah, I'd go New Hope, Empire, and Return. Like, I think they're all equally wonderful movies, and there's certainly been times in my life where I think probably the correct answer is the best one is Empire, but A New Hope is so incredible. It's a brilliant morality tale. It completely, you didn't need to have more before or after that. You could have just watched that and been satisfied. But the opening of that movie, inspired by Hidden Fortress, is 2 robots for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever. Like as a now screenwriter, I look back at that and I'm like, how the fuck did they get away with that? And yet you watch it and it works like gangbusters. Like, that was the first movie I saw in the theater, and I've told this story once before. Like, I didn't know what it was. I hadn't been to a movie before. I didn't know anything about it. There wasn't like, Apple trailers to go watch the QuickTime, version of the trailer like a million times. I had gotten a toy. My brother got what appeared to be a golden man, and I got what appeared to be a trash can. So I was like, this sucks. I don't like this. Like, because I didn't know who they were. And then I see the movie, and it turns out they're
trash like the best characters.
The best character, and R2-D2 remains one of my all-time favorite characters in anything. Like, my text message alert is, the Jawa Utini. Like, oh yeah, I go pretty hard, for those movies and that fandom. But I put them in 4, 5, and 6, or whatever the proper is. I really think that first one sort of gets glossed over in a way.
It's the most watchable. It's like, I mean, Empire is probably objectively a better movie, but it's less enjoyable to watch. So I think Star Wars is more. Star Wars is just it's a fun adventure movie. Empire is like when things get serious.
Yeah, and look, I've never anybody who will disrespect Jedi will catch some hands from this guy. I love
Ewok
that
hands.
movie. Yeah, I fucking love Ewoks too, man. I still have my Wicket stuffed animal. I love that dude. But the ending of that movie, the cross-cutting of that, is literally Oscar worthy, and it's incredibly emotional, and it's so deeply satisfying. And if you don't like Ewoks, I don't know why you hate life. But yeah, I'll go with 4, 5, and 6.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
What's your rank? What's your ranking?
Oh man, honestly, like, God, I haven't done a mental updating lately, but I would probably say it'd be a combination of Star Wars, um, Last Jedi, and God, I don't know. I mean, you know what's funny is like I know that people have like a mixed relationship with it, but I find Rogue One to be very satisfying.
Rogue One is deeply satisfying, and I love those characters. I would love to. I'm really excited they're going to do that Cassian series. I
It's a
love.
really bold move though when you really think about it.
Really
It
insane.
yeah, it's like Star Wars, like if it was like I don't know, like all the characters, I mean, I guess spoiler alert for Rogue One, all the characters die at the end.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing.
it's just like when you think about it, it's such a dark movie, but it's also really hopeful. Like I love the moment at the end with oh my god, I just completely forgot what the name of the main character's name is.
Jyn Erso.
Oh yeah, Jyn Erso and Cassian. Like that moment when they're at the beach and like
Yeah.
they're satisfied with what they did, and I think there's like a
They
lot of
also
beauty in that moment.
they also don't kiss. It's
Right.
two people that are two badass warriors. It's not about the romance. It's about the accomplishment, which was totally amazing.
Yeah,
I'm a big Last Jedi fan, though. I'm really fascinated. And it's probably a whole other podcast about how both Last Jedi and Endgame are very much explorations of failure.
yeah, totally.
And I really find that fascinating, especially in the era that we live in. I also think Rogue One, just as a side note, was released at a really interesting time. Post that election, I think it resonated on a level that I'm
It's
not saying it wouldn't
resistance.
have. It was, it really felt like it popped in a way that it may not have a year before, or maybe even a year after. I don't know. But yeah, I do think it's fascinating that there's these larger, big budget movies that are openly expressing or exploring issues of failure, depression, and how those things can be overcome or even make you strong. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and another thing I liked about Last Jedi, I mean, honestly, like I'm not a huge fan of the Canto Bight stuff. Like I think it's fine,
Yeah.
but the rest of it is just so good that it really works for me. And like in particular, like I love that it really works some nuance in there. Like Benicio del Toro's character is actually really kind of a door opener for some of like the really interesting nuance to that story. Like the fact that he's not just selling to the Empire. Like I think that stuff makes it feel a little bit more whole in a way that it previously wasn't, perhaps because it was
Yeah, yeah.
just so purely one side. And I'm not saying that like all stories have to like look at all sides, but it's like it's going back to Meet the Skrulls. It's like you're never, the villains are never the villain of their own story. They view themselves as the hero, and it's like it's always a lot more complicated than just like medal ceremonies and ones where Chewbacca doesn't get one because everyone's a jerk. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I think it's if you 4, 5, and 6 are a great morality tale, but I think if you want to world build and really let there be some nuance in your story, you're going to have to go to some uncomfortable places.
did you watch the big making of in Last Jedi?
Oh God, yeah, it's
It's
amazing.
incredible. It's incredible.
It's so raw, and it's so great. Like I'm a huge fan of Ryan Johnson's. I think we were at like USC at a similar time. I didn't know the guy, but I always thought, like if you ever got a shot like that, like, wouldn't you want to take the biggest swing possible and risk it all?
Yeah.
And I really thought he didn't make a lot of safe choices.
I remember watching The Brothers Bloom and I was like, this guy should direct a Star Wars movie.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Definitely not. I love The Brothers Bloom. I think it's a great movie, but it is certainly not a movie.
no, it's not a.
Ryan
It's not a
Johnson
gateway.
was a very unexpected choice for a lot of people, but he really worked.
I think he's brilliant, and can't wait for his new movie, and I hope he makes 10 more Star Wars, but I also hope he continues to make original movies because he's got a really great voice.
He does. All right, next question. I feel like this is gonna be easy. I know that you've been to, at one point, I think 16 straight San Diego Comic Cons. What is your favorite
20,
con?
20 now, I think.
Wow.
20 in a row. Yeah, I started going with my brother. It was sort of like our Vegas trip. But you know, he hasn't come out as much anymore because he's got kids now. I think it's probably a tie. Probably the first one that we went to because it was a gentler time. You've been to San Diego?
I've never been to San Diego.
Oh, you got to come. You got to come once.
Yeah.
It's worth seeing. I love it. I'm going again this year. I said I wasn't going to go, and then we went and got a hotel, and we're going because my wife and I love going. It's fun, and it's also, to me, conventions have ultimately become, you know, one, it's a great way to meet readers. I don't table at San Diego, but it's also the thing I love about shows is I get to see people I don't normally get to see.
Yeah.
Particularly like New York Comic Con and things like that. Emerald City too. But probably the combination of the first one, because I was just so overwhelmed. I didn't know. I'd gone to like local comic book shows in LA. There used to be one down at the Shrine by USC that I would go to all the time, but it was very kind of low key, and it was just like, it was comics and toys. But this was like so overwhelming. And this is back when like they would give you free T-shirts and hats, and you could go down there broke like I was and still feel like you had a really rad time. We said rad back then.
I still say rad.
Okay, good. And then it's probably a tie with that, and I don't remember the year. I'm bad with years, but it was the year that they showed Avatar in Hall H, and that was right around when Hall H was evolving into an absolute dumpster fire. And my brother and I are huge James Cameron fans, and at the time, like, no one had kind of seen anything from the movie.
Right.
And the word was that he was going to show some extended footage, and it was going to be in 3D. And say what you want about Avatar, it was an event, and he built it into this theatrical event. So we went, and we waited out, and we got there early, like, I don't know, maybe 6 in the morning, and we were in a good spot. But everyone there was in line was a teenage girl or their moms, basically. And I was like, oh, this is really great. Like, cause, you know, like a lot of times at that time, especially, like, you know, I think, you know, Comic Cons have gotten better at being more welcoming. They still have a long way to go, but they're better now. But back then it was not always the case. And I was like, oh, like finally, this place is like, you know, for everybody, and that's great. And then I started realizing that everybody was there for the panel before Avatar, which was Twilight. I've never seen Twilight. I have never read any of the books. I have nothing against them. I have nothing for them. I'm completely agnostic. But these were some of the nicest, kindest, like fans. They were so excited. They had no idea, at least the ones that I talked to, that there was anything outside of this. They thought this was just all Comic-Con was Hall H. And I was like, oh, you should go like check out the floor. And it was amazing because we waited with them. They got the great seats because they were ahead of us. But as soon as the panel was done, and I only saw 2 scenes from Twilight in my life, they both involve really hot guys taking their shirts off. So that's what I think Twilight is
oh, yeah.
hot guys taking their shirts off.
That's a long and short of it.
Yeah, which, by the way, judging by the audience's reaction, was deeply, deeply satisfying.
Wait, can I say one thing really quick about Twilight?
Yeah.
My wife really enjoys the books, and her and her friends would always go see the movies. Like as soon as they came out, it was like a big event for them. They would actually sneak in wine, and they would go in and
right.
watch it. I actually have seen all the movies now, and I saw the last one with my wife in theaters, and the last one has like straight up one of the most buck wild twists I've ever seen.
I have read about that, and that's insane.
Yeah.
I was like, how is this not a David Lynch movie? This is amazing.
It's also pretty spectacular because like Michael Sheen plays the villain, and he has,
oh my God,
no doubt the greatest laugh in the history of film in that movie. And like my wife and I have watched that laugh like a million billion times. It's either him
to your ringtone.
Yeah, exactly. It's either him or Stanley Tucci's laugh as Caesar Flickerman in the Hunger Games movies.
Yeah.
Which is so toothy and glorious. I love it.
Oh, it's amazing.
But anyways, yeah. So that's it on Twilight.
But yeah, that was. I loved it because, and then by the way, the panel ends. They like 2,000 of them
book it,
got up and left.
Yeah.
And so my brother and I moved up. So as a result, we got a better seat. And I know a lot of people like I talked to like, oh, that's when Comic-Con jumped the shark and blah blah blah. And I was like, you know, I was there. Like they were some of the nicest people. They were just so excited. They loved the panel. They got into it, and like it kind of reminded me what I love. And it was funny because I was telling them, I was like, oh, you should stay for Avatar. I think you're going to like it. And they're like, no, thanks. And then obviously Avatar becomes like at the time the highest grossing movie of all time. And I think there was some overlap in that audience. You know, and so I love seeing people get excited about stuff. I love when fandom is just about excitement, you know, and about the just pure love of something, and there's no judgment, and there's no, like, I love going to anime conventions because I'm not that well versed, and so like I'm seeing all this amazing cosplay, and I have no idea what it's about, but I can feel people's excitement, and that's, I don't know, that emotional transference is exciting to me.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. Next question. This probably will be easy too, but maybe you might upset a country with this. Who this is from a patron. I'm not going to reveal that patron's name.
Uh-oh.
Who's your number one favorite Irish artist?
Well, Declan, I'm glad you asked.
He definitely asked that as a joke question. It was in my Patreon, and like totally facetious, but it was like I gotta ask anyways.
I'm going to go with Declan. I love Deckles, but I'm also a huge fan of his work, and I'm really really excited and feel a lot of excitement for his writing career now too. I love Savage Town. I thought it was great. I'm not saying
really,
that 'cause
it's good.
I'm not saying that 'cause he's a bud. It's legit great, and I've got a little sneak peek of some of the other things that he's been working on, and I just think he's a great storyteller. But I love all of Ireland. I love all of my Irish friends. But since Declan is making me choose, I will obviously choose Deckles.
All right, last question. You created the phrase "one true fandom" in an interview, so I created a new one.
Oh,
What is your OTS? Your one true sandwich?
my one true sandwich. Oh, I don't have it anymore because it's not good for me. But it's got to be peanut butter and jelly, grape jelly. It's got to be grape jelly. Jam is for jerks.
Yeah.
I was a really shitty kid, and I did not eat much. And I loved peanut butter and jelly though, and so at a certain point, my parents were like, you know, how, like, kids would be like, it's like the rule is like you can't leave the table until you finish your food. I'd be like, fine. I'd be like, fine, and I'd bring, like, my brother and I would check out like those old classic, you know, Marvel trade paperbacks like Son of Origins or, you know, the superhero women of Marvel, and I would just be like, fine, I'm just going to read this for the rest of the night. And they finally just gave up, but they were like, if you want to eat, you got to make your own food. So I would make myself 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I must have consumed, and I'm Wonder Bread, by the way, super healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I must have consumed like a sheer tonnage of PB&J. So it's got to be PB&J.
Solid
Wonder
choice.
Bread. Velvet peanut butter if you're from Michigan, from back in the day, and Concord grape jelly. I haven't had one in years. But man, just even thinking about it, I want all 3. And it was like my pack lunch every day. My dad made them the best, which is weird because, like, how hard is it to make PB&J? But that dude, man, knew how to.
There's an art form to it.
It really is. He knew how to spread jelly onto every single corner of it, so every bite felt like the best bite.
Yeah.
I've never been able to recreate it, try as I might. But yeah, I'm gonna have to go with PB&J. What's yours?
Oh no, honestly, like I mean, I don't know if it'd be PB&J, but I actually still to this day eat PB&J, but I'm using, like, you know, Dave's Killer Bread and
yeah.
Adam's Crunchy Peanut Butter, and, like, you know, I don't really fancy up the jelly at all. I like boysenberry. I'm like kind of weird, but I'm very allegiant to all breakfast foods, so it'd probably be some sort of breakfast sandwich. There's this one breakfast sandwich at this local place called Snow City Cafe that's like a biscuit. It's very basic besides one element. It's a biscuit. It's an egg cooked however you want. I do over medium. It's bacon and it's cheddar. And here's the wrinkle: strawberry jam.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and it's really good. It's really good.
You had me till the end.
Yeah, I remember when I saw the strawberry jam, I was like, should I hold the strawberry jam? And they're like, no, you got to try it with the strawberry jam. I was like, okay. And I was like, this is really good. But if you would like to read a really fascinating article, the NBA, there was an article, I think 2 years ago, that was about how the NBA had become obsessed with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to the point where, like, some of their, like, writers or some of their dietitians were like, we got to regulate this. You guys are too addicted to peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But there's this huge article that ESPN the magazine did that had, like, amazing graphics that would show, like, how the best NBA players like their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, because they had all these intense preferences.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really great piece, but at the same time, I do want to say, if your perception is that peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are bad, find an unhealthy looking NBA player because they all eat them.
That's
Case
true.
closed. Case
That's
closed.
true. You know what? I'm gonna have to do. I got to do a lot of soul searching today. Maybe turn this around. I'm always fascinated though by like what athletes like game day meals are like, especially like during the NHL playoffs, which is going on right now. And they all are so superstitious and like like they have to have like their chicken parm or like what they sort of carb load with is always fascinating to me because like they're especially in a hockey game like you're burning like fuel like
Oh God, it's
by the
horrible.
second. I remember the Red Wings went to I think it was a triple overtime game, and it was I think it was one of the first times because like everyone was like they were dehydrated, but they were also hungry, and someone had the idea to bring in Pedialyte, which is for kids.
Yeah, I remember that.
And now it's like a standard, like they have it in locker rooms because it's like got all this nutrition and it will hydrate you in a very healthy, natural way. But I'm always fascinated, like, because it's like they are like these cars, and it's like do you put unleaded gas in, diesel? Like, what do you fuel them with? Because like that's a level of body mechanics that I will as a giant pile of laundry myself will never achieve.
There's another really interesting article that happened recently. It was like New York Times did this piece. Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors is obsessed with popcorn. And they did a ranking with him where he ranked all of the popcorn in every arena.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
Yeah. And he actually had like really nuanced thought. He had created like a 5 item ranking system where he would rank based off of like crunchiness and based off of freshness and all the stuff like that. It's really interesting. Like I find all this stuff to be really fascinating. It actually, hilariously, I can tie this back to comics. Like, this stuff is what I really enjoy in sports, just like I really enjoy the weird, atypical, like, I don't want to say slice of life, but like kind of like the ordinary stuff involving superheroes.
Yeah.
And it's because like you don't really see those stories told very often. And I like it when these characters are humanized, just like I like it when I read about the fact that this is how, I don't know, LeBron James prefers his peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Oh, I 100% agree. Like that was the stuff, when I worked on Supernatural, because like I wrote a whole episode that took place in the car, and because I was like, there's all this time they spend driving around. I'm like, I love road trips. What did they talk about? Like, what did they eat? Did they have a cooler? Like that mundane stuff, especially in an ongoing story where you kind of feel like you've seen it all, is literally the stuff that you haven't seen because it's literally edited out of the story, right?
Right.
But it's also like amazing.
Yeah.
And I also think, whether it's, passion for popcorn or passion for comics, like anything that you're like really excited about is always just, like I said before, like exciting to me. Like I want to read that ranking because I love stadium popcorn. It's always terrible, but it's always delicious.
Yeah.
Like my favorite popcorn is the one that they serve at the Disneyland parks. Like, cause I'm sure it's radioactive. I'm sure there's
damn, is it good?
Oh, it's amazing. I'm sure it's like nothing organic. It's like, going to McDonald's, it's like almost eating vegan because I'm sure there's no meat in that burger, but like, it's still, it's like that popcorn. Like I can literally like taste it right now. But I'm going to check that article out because, like I said, I love when people get fired up about stuff, I'll
send you some links. They're really good. There was another ESPN one about how the NBA is obsessed with really high-end wine. The NBA is just filled with characters. I love it. But Robbie, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Meet the Skrulls, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Star Wars, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
I really appreciate you having me. This was a blast, and hope to do it again sometime.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Robbie Thompson. You can find him on Twitter at rthompson1138 and his work in Meet the Skrulls at Marvel. Off Panel is brought to you by my newly relaunched comic site Sketched. Visit the site to see what's coming, and don't forget to subscribe if it sounds up your alley. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Sketched and Off Panel on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Alex Dimitropoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Gus, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Sletcher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockard, Kukachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Nassy, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Garner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruta Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Op Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.